I found out my house had been sold to my little sister the same week I found out I was buying it. Not sold on paper, sold in conversation, at a dinner table 3 states from mine, by people who had never once asked me if I agreed. I'm Dana Kowalski, 34, and I run structural inspections on old buildings in Pittsburgh. The kind of job where you spend your whole career looking for cracks nobody else can see. I should have looked closer to home. Here's the sentence that started it. My mother, over the phone, breezy as a weather report. We already told Renee she could use the 3rd floor. It's basically empty anyway. 3rd floor, my 3rd floor, in my house, that I own, that Renee had never once been invited to see the inside of. Stick around, because by the time this story ends, there's a courtroom, a locksmith, and a nursery my sister decorated in a house that was never going to be hers. If you've ever bailed someone out and gotten blamed for the whole, you already know how this feels. Let's get into it. 3 years before that phone call, I closed on a red brick triple-decker in Bloomfield, bought at auction, gutted to the studs, rebuilt with my own 2 hands on weekends, because contractors quoted me numbers that made me laugh out loud in their offices. Top floor was going to be my studio. Middle floor, my life. Ground floor, a rental unit I planned to lease out once the plumbing stopped fighting me. I tell you the math because my family never bothered to learn it. In my house, being the responsible one wasn't a compliment. It was a job description nobody paid me for. When my sister Renee's car got repossessed at 26, I covered the balance and called it an early birthday gift. When our parents' basement flooded, I paid the restoration crew directly so Dad wouldn't worry about it. Being useful felt like being loved, right up until the day it stopped feeling like either. The triple-decker was supposed to be different. Mine. Actually mine. No open tab. I got 11 months of that before the first favor landed. Renee called in March, voice dipped in honey. She and her husband Marcus had hit a rough patch. Code, I'd learn, for an eviction from their own apartment for 6 months of unpaid rent they'd hidden from everyone, including each other's families. Just for the summer, she said. Just until they land on their feet. I did the thing engineers do when a structure feels unstable. I documented the load. I texted the terms in writing. 3rd floor only, split utilities, out by August 1st. Renee sent back a single line. The best sis ever. No confirmation, no agreement, just enthusiasm dressed up as a yes. I should have known better. Enthusiasm isn't consent. It's a door left ajar. They moved in with 2 suitcases and a futon. Fine. Normal. Then, in week 2, I came home to find my studio easel folded up and shoved behind the water heater, because, and I quote, the light's better up there for Marcus's plants. Small thing, grain of sand thing. I let it go, because the calendar said August. August came, Renee didn't leave. She got pregnant instead. And suddenly the family group chat had a new subject line. The baby needs stability. Here's where it stopped being a favor and became a campaign. My mother started referring to the 3rd floor, on calls with relatives, as the nursery floor. Not where Renee's staying. The nursery floor, like it had a deed of its own. I found out how far that campaign had gone on a Tuesday when I climbed the stairs to grab a client folder from my studio closet and found the door already open. Inside, my easel gone entirely, replaced by a crib, half assembled, with a paint swatch taped to the wall, sage green, the exact one I'd chosen for my own bedroom 2 years earlier and never gotten around to using. I stood in the doorway of what used to be my studio and realized my sister hadn't just moved into my house. She had started redesigning it around a baby that wasn't born yet, in a room she didn't ask to keep. That night I opened a note on my phone and started keeping dates. A habit was born out of a paint swatch. By September, Marcus had set up his workshop in half my garage. My kayak and ladder, now living on the driveway like evicted tenants. By October, our parents had started spending 3, then 4 nights a week, helping with the baby, sleeping in my guest room, eating groceries I bought, leaving before I got home from work, and returning after I left, so that for weeks I genuinely wasn't sure how many people were living in my house. I called a family meeting. I brought a 1-page plan: utilities split, move-out date, chore rotation. My father studied his coffee mug like it owed him an answer. My mother put her hand flat on the paper the way you'd calm a spooked horse, and said the sentence I now think of as the thesis statement of that entire year: "Dana, we don't do spreadsheets. We do family." Renee laughed, not unkindly, almost fondly, and said, "You've always been so official about everything." Nobody signed. Nobody agreed. The plan ended up under a pizza box by 9 p.m. Here's the part that still gets me. I let it go again. Because Renee was 7 months pregnant, and some part of me, the part that had been the fixer since I was 14, genuinely believed if I just held on a little longer, this would resolve itself. It didn't resolve. It multiplied. In November, I came home from a 2-day inspection trip in Erie to find a moving truck in my driveway. Not Renee's, my parents'. Their condo lease, it turned out, had ended a month earlier than they'd told me, and instead of renewing it, they'd quietly let it lapse and redirected their own mail to my address back in September. September, 2 full months before they ever mentioned needing anywhere to stay. I stood on my own front lawn reading a change of address confirmation with my parents' names on it, dated 2 months before they'd said one word to me about moving in, and understood, all at once, that nothing that had happened that year had been an accident. It had been a plan. And I was the last person told about it. That night, my mother explained it to me over dinner like she was doing me a favor. "We didn't want to stress you out while you were working. We knew you'd say yes eventually." They hadn't asked permission. They'd assumed inheritance. If your stomach just dropped the way mine did in that driveway, stay with me, because this is where I stopped being the fixer. I drove to a law office the next morning before work. Not after work, not when things calmed down, before work, because I finally understood there was no version of calm coming on its own. I brought everything: the deed with my name alone on it, the mortgage statements, my March texts laying out the terms, the change of address confirmation, photos of the crib in what used to be my studio. The attorney, a sharp woman named Priya Nair who'd clearly seen this exact family movie before, told me the truth in about 4 sentences. My relatives were what Pennsylvania calls tenants at will, living there with permission, no lease, no rent ever paid. Getting them out lawfully meant a written notice first, then a formal filing if they refused to leave, then a hearing. "Legally," she said, tapping my folder, "this is the easiest case I'll see all month. Personally, it's the hardest kind I do." Then she asked me the question that actually mattered. "Are you ready for the version of your family that exists after this?" I told her I needed 1 week, not because I doubted the law, because some stubborn, hopeful part of me wanted to give my family one last chance to choose me back before I made them choose the courthouse. I offered a real deal. My parents could stay through the winter, no deadline, warmly, genuinely. If they backed me on one thing, Renee and Marcus needed their own place before the baby came, and I'd hand them $2,000 toward the deposit to make it real. Not a loan, a gift. Marcus's counteroffer, delivered with his arms crossed like he was doing me a kindness. I should just sign the 3rd floor over to them outright, for the baby's stability, and they'd pay me back once he found work. My mother added, without looking up from her plate, "Don't make this a whole legal thing, Dana. You'll regret it." I said one word: no. Whole, unsoftened, maybe for the first time in 20 years. My mother set down her fork and said quietly, then you're choosing a house over your family. I remember thinking, no, I'm choosing to stop paying rent on a family that only shows up for the invoice. 2 days later, notices went out. Certified mail, one for each of them. I decided they'd hear it from me first, at the same table where they'd knotted away my studio. My mother read 2 lines and stood up so fast her chair hit the wall, calling this the cruelest thing anyone in this family had ever done to her. Her, not me. Marcus laughed and folded his notice into a paper airplane, sailed it across the kitchen. Renee, 8 months pregnant, didn't yell. She just looked at me and said, very softly, "I didn't think you actually had it in you," which somehow hurt more than anything my mother said. My father read every line of his notice twice, folded it into quarters, put it in his shirt pocket, and started clearing the table without a word. I would spend the next month trying to figure out what that silence meant. I want to be honest about the night I nearly stopped. 10 days after the notices, I came downstairs at 1 a.m. and found my father sitting alone in the dark kitchen with an old photo, him and me, on the day I got my inspection license, before any of this. He didn't hear me at first. When he did, he just said, to the table, "I watched my own brother do this to your Aunt Carol. Made her the villain for wanting her house back." Then, quieter, I told myself I'd never let that happen twice, and here I am, letting it happen twice. Standing in that doorway, I felt the ground tilt. 20 years of being the fixer doesn't undo itself in a single week. Pity is quicksand, and I was in it to my knees. Then, 3 days before the hearing, my mother played her last card. A call from urgent care, my father's blood pressure spiking, chest tight, a scare that turned out, thank God, to be stress-induced and not cardiac. And in the waiting room, my mother turned to me with eyes gone flat and said, "I hope getting your house back was worth this." For about 60 seconds, she had me. Then a nurse I recognized from a job site mentioned, in passing, that my parents' new condo application, the one they'd told me had fallen through, had actually been approved back in October. They'd had somewhere to go for 6 weeks. They'd simply chosen not to. I stopped feeling guilty in that waiting room. I started feeling clear. The courtroom wasn't dramatic. Wooden benches, a ceiling fan that ticked, a magistrate with the patient exhaustion of someone who'd heard every version of this story already. Whose name is on the deed? Mine alone. Has any rent ever been paid? Not $1, ever, by anyone. Was proper notice served? Certified mail, signed receipts, photographs, dated texts. Marcus stood and gave his speech. Verbal promises, sweat equity, a family that takes care of its own. The magistrate listened, chin on her hand, then asked 4 short questions. Is that promise in writing? Is your name on the deed? Have you paid toward the property? Do you contest that you received notice? 4 no's, each quieter than the last. Judgment for the plaintiff. 10 days to vacate. In the hallway afterward, my mother called me cold. Renee, 8 months pregnant, said nothing at all, just looked at me the way you look at someone you no longer recognize. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like someone who'd finally stopped bleeding and was only now noticing how much blood there'd been. They used all 10 days. My parents left first, my mother directing the movers with the wounded dignity of someone evicted from a kingdom that was never hers, delivering her exit line from my porch. "I hope this house makes you happy, Dana. It clearly means more to you than we do." My father stayed behind 10 extra minutes. He fixed the back door hinge that had been sticking since spring, the repair he'd promised in March and never gotten to, and left his spare key on the counter with an envelope of cash. "For the utilities," he said. "Some of them, anyway." Then, at the door, "Your Aunt Carol forgave your uncle eventually. Took her 9 years. I'm not telling you to rush that. I'm telling you it's possible." Renee and Marcus left last, on the 10th day, her father driving the U-Haul, because Marcus, true to form, had spent the 10 days insisting the judge would change her mind. He hadn't packed a single box himself. My nephew was born 3 weeks later, in a hospital I read about secondhand, in a group chat I'd already been quietly removed from. I painted the 3rd floor back to white that winter, no more sage green, and turned it into the studio it was always supposed to be. Some mornings I still find a single strip of crib assembly instructions wedged behind a baseboard, and instead of anger, it does the job of an entire therapy session, proof that the house is mine again, and proof of what almost wasn't. The utility bill dropped by $400 a month, which felt, absurdly, like a raise. I ate dinner alone at my own table more nights than I'd like to admit, and here's the part nobody tells you going in. Eventually, the quiet stops sounding like punishment and starts sounding like peace. 2 weeks before Christmas, my father knocked on my door. Actually knocked. Waited to be let in, carrying his toolbox and nothing else. No speech, no apology, not really. Just a man fixing a window he'd promised to fix 9 months earlier. I let him in. We didn't talk about the 3rd floor. There's a spare key in my kitchen drawer now, cut but unclaimed, waiting for whoever in my family earns their way back to it. It might sit there for years. I've made peace with that, because here's what that whole terrible, necessary year taught me. A family that only shows up when you're paying isn't loving you, it's invoicing you. And the bravest thing you'll ever do isn't slamming the door. It's simply, finally, closing the tab. That's my story. One deed, one paint swatch, one spare key still waiting. If someone's temporary is quietly erasing you from your own life, that's your sign. Put it in writing. Tell me your version below. And if this one hit close, you know what to do before you go.